Serena adjusted the mask over her face, the familiar sound of her own breathing in the regulator filling the momentary silence. Below her, the lights of the small submersible, the Triton, cut through the deep blue darkness of the North Atlantic, illuminating their destination, the ghostly hull of the Odessa star, recently found by a sonar survey at a depth considered impossible for a ship of its type and era. A freighter mysteriously lost in the 1950s, the Odessa star was a prize for Serena's salvage team. An intact time capsule, promising historical artifacts and perhaps answers to its disappearance. But even from there, from the relative safety of the Triton hovering above the wreck, Serena felt a chill that didn't come from the frigid water. Something about that ship was wrong. She and her dive partner, Ben Carter, were veterans of deep water salvage. They had seen wrecks ravaged by time and pressure, bizarre ecosystems colonizing twisted metal. But the Odessa star was different. It was almost perfectly intact, sitting upright on the seabed as if carefully placed there. And strangest of all, it was clean. No significant marine growth, no deep-sea coral, no ghostly anemones. It was as if the abyssal life itself avoided touching the dark, silent structure. "All set here, Triton." Ben's voice came through Serena's communicator, slightly tinny. "Initiating exit. Keep comms open, Eva," he added, referring to the captain of the support vessel on the surface, hundreds of meters above. "Roger that, Ben. Good luck down there. Stay within parameters," Eva's calm voice replied. Serena and Ben exited the sub, their dive propulsion vehicles, DPVs, humming them smoothly through the dark water towards the main deck of the Odessa star. Their helmet lights swept across the immense structure. The hull metal seemed strangely dark, almost light-absorbing. There were no obvious signs of damage to explain the sinking. Hatches were closed, bridge windows intact, though pitch black within. The plan was to enter through the command bridge, check the instruments, try to locate the ship's log, then proceed to the main cargo hold. They used a hydraulic cutting tool to open one of the bridge doors, which was jammed but not locked. The interior was dark, the water cloudy with fine sediment stirred up. As the water cleared slightly under their lights, what they saw was unnerving. The bridge was eerily preserved. Brass navigation equipment, though tarnished, sat in place. Charts were still clipped to the navigation table, but there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a thin layer of sediment covering everything and an oppressive silence that not even their breathing could fully break. "Weird," Ben communicated. "Looks like the crew just evaporated." "Very weird," Serena agreed, playing her light over an engine order telegraph. "No remains, Ben? In a wreck this old?" "Nothing. Let's find the log." They found the ship's log in a watertight compartment near the captain's chair. Miraculously, the inner pages were mostly dry, though stained and fragile. It would take time to analyze on the surface, but the last entry was dated the day the ship disappeared. Serena felt a shiver as she placed the book in a sealed collection bag. While Ben checked the bridge instruments, Serena felt an urge to look out the dark bridge windows into the interior of the ship stretching behind them. She shone her light down a dark corridor leading towards the crew quarters, and for a fleeting instant she thought she saw something move in the deep shadows at the far end. "Ben, did you see that?" she asked, her voice tense. "See what?" "Thought I saw movement down there." Ben aimed his powerful beam down the corridor. It was empty, just shadows and murky water. "Probably just sediment shifting, Serena. Or your imagination. This place is creepy." But Serena wasn't convinced. That movement hadn't felt natural. They decided to proceed to the cargo hold, sticking to the plan. The descent through the ship's internal corridors was claustrophobic. The water felt colder here, the silence even deeper. Occasionally their lights revealed odd details, personal items left behind abruptly, a pipe on a table, an open book on a bunk, but still no sign of the crew. It was in one of the access corridors to the cargo hold that Serena noticed the markings scratched into the metal walls. They weren't random scratches. They were symbols, complex, non-geometric, vaguely resembling a mix of cuneiform script and organic circuitry, and they looked as though they'd been made recently, scratched through the thin layer of silt and sediment. "Ben, look at this," she said, illuminating the symbols. Ben moved closer. "What the hell is that? Never seen anything like it on a ship." "Me neither. And look, they seem fresh." A feeling of real dread began to grip Serena. The intact ship, the absence of marine life, the missing crew, the strange symbols. This wasn't an ordinary shipwreck. It was something else. A silent tomb holding a terrible secret. They finally reached the main cargo hold. It was vast, pitch black beyond the reach of their lights. Whatever the Odessa star had been carrying, the hold seemed mostly empty, except for some broken wooden crates and unidentified debris. But in the center of the huge space sat something. Large, covered by a heavy, dark tarpaulin. "What do you suppose that is?" Ben asked. "Cargo manifest mentioned heavy machinery confidential," Serena replied, recalling the preliminary documents they'd seen. "Let's take a look." They approached the covered object. The tarp was strangely intact, showing none of the expected decay. With effort, they managed to pull back a corner of the tarp to reveal what lay beneath. It wasn't machinery. It was some kind of structure or artifact made of an oily black metal that seemed to vibrate slightly in the water. It had a vaguely organic shape, like a giant egg or cocoon, covered in the same intricate symbols they had seen scratched on the walls. And from within it came a low, pulsing hum, almost inaudible, but resonating through the water directly into their bones. Suddenly, Ben's lights flickered and died. "Damn it! My battery!" "Impossible, we fully charged them," Serena said, turning her light towards him, but the moment she did, her own light flickered and dimmed drastically, casting only a faint glow. Near total darkness enveloped them, broken only by the weak beams of their lights and the pulsing hum from the artifact. That's when they heard it, a dragging sound coming from the shadows of the cargo hold. The same sound Serena thought she'd heard in the corridor. And this time it was close, very close. "Serena, what is that?" Ben whispered, his voice tight on the comms. "I don't know. Stay behind me." Serena raised her dive knife, an almost useless gesture in the oppressive darkness. The hum from the artifact seemed to intensify. Then, from the shadows, something emerged slowly into the faint glow of their lights. It wasn't human. It was a shapeless mass of something. It seemed composed of pieces of the wreck itself, twisted metal, cables, perhaps even bone fragments, all held together by a dark, pulsing, sludge-like substance. It had no definite form, but writhed and shifted, and from its amorphous bulk, multiple thin, tentacle-like appendages extended and retracted. And in the center of the mass, a single large, pale, milky eye opened and fixed on them. The thing moved towards them, dragging itself across the hold floor with surprising speed. Ben yelled. Serena felt icy panic seize her. "Eva, get the Triton down here now!" she screamed into the comms, knowing it was likely too late. One of the tentacles lashed out and wrapped around Ben's ankle, pulling him down. Serena slashed it, the tentacle with her knife, but it was like cutting thick rubber. Another tentacle shot towards her. She dodged, firing her DPV thruster to max, trying to retreat towards the hold's exit. The last thing she saw before rocketing out of the cargo hold was Ben being dragged by the amorphous creature towards the pulsing artifact in the center, the thing's milky eye fixed on him, and the symbols on the surrounding walls seeming to glow faintly in the darkness. She navigated the dark corridors of the ship in a blur of panic, the image of Ben and that thing burning in her mind. She reached the bridge, squeezed through the door they had cut, and shot upwards towards the distant light of the Triton, which was descending rapidly in response to her distress call. She reached the safety of the sub, slamming the hatch shut. Behind her, heart hammering so hard it felt like it would break her ribs. Through the viewport she saw the Odessa star below, a dark, silent silhouette in the abyss. No sign of Ben, no sign of the creature, just the silent hull, guarding its horror. They made it to the surface. Serena was in shock, unable to fully articulate what had happened. The ship's log was recovered but damaged by the rapid decompression and the water that inevitably seeped in. The few legible pages spoke of a live cargo picked up at an uncharted island, of nightmares plaguing the crew, of symbols appearing on the walls, and of something awakening in the hold before the entries ended abruptly. The salvage company covered up the incident. Ben was declared lost at sea due to catastrophic equipment failure at depth. Serena was forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, threatened with lawsuits and professional ruin if she spoke out. She never dived again. The vast blue she once loved now represented only an abyss of unspeakable terror. She moved inland, far from the ocean, but it didn't help. The nightmares haunt her. The image of that creature of sludge and metal, the milky eye, the pulsing artifact, the sound of the low hum. And sometimes, when the humidity is high or during thunderstorms, she swears she sees those strange symbols forming in the condensation on her windows or in the shadows of dark corners. The Odessa star is still down. There in the darkness, a silent hull guarding an entity that was perhaps awakened by human touch. And Serena lives with the terrifying knowledge of what the ocean can hide in its darkest depths, and with the guilt and fear that perhaps, in escaping, she didn't come back alone. Perhaps a fragment of that darkness, that sentient sludge, clung to her, waiting to manifest again. My name is Arthur. I'm a sound hunter, not in the musical sense. I'm a bioacoustician and field sound artist, obsessed with capturing the rarest and strangest sounds of our planet, especially those from the deep ocean. I spent years on precarious boats with expensive hydrophones and sensitive recording equipment, listening to the clicks of sperm whales, the laments of blue whales, and the countless pops and whistles of the unseen life beneath the waves. It was solitary work, often frustrating, but the thrill of capturing a sound never before recorded, an unknown dialect from the abyss, was addictive. It was this quest that led me to the Agulhas Current, off the southeast coast of Africa, an area known for its turbulent waters and treacherous depths. And it was there that I recorded the sound that ruined my life. I was aboard my small, adapted research vessel, the Audia, alone, as I preferred to work. I had spent weeks in the area, lowering my hydrophones to ever-increasing depths, searching for rare-beaked whale vocalizations, or perhaps the elusive sound of the colossal squid. The sea was calm that week, a rare window of good weather for the region. On one particularly clear night, with the moon just a sliver in the starry sky, I decided to deploy an extreme deep-water hydrophone array, pushing the limits of my gear down to about 1,500 meters. The first few hours were quiet, except for the distant clicks of dolphins and the ubiquitous snap of pistol shrimp. I was almost dozing in my chair in the small cabin, watching the spectrograms on my monitors, when the signal appeared. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was incredibly low frequency, almost at the edge of what my equipment and human hearing could detect. But it was unmistakable. It wasn't biological, at least not like anything I knew. It was a long, complex series of resonant tones, almost like deep bells or a pipe organ played very slowly, with harmonic overtones that felt wrong, out of tune, in a way that caused physical discomfort. The structure of the sound was complex, almost mathematical in its progression, but repetitive, like a loop or a long, slow chant. My heart hammered. I recorded frantically, checking levels, adjusting filters, trying to isolate the signal. It lasted for almost 20 minutes, that slow, hypnotic sequence of deep, dissonant tones before fading away as silently as it began. I sat there in the quiet cabin, the sound still echoing in my head, a mix of triumph and a deep, inexplicable dread. I had recorded something unique, something no one had ever heard, but something about that sound was profoundly unsettling. There was a cold, alien intelligence in its structure, and a melancholy so vast it seemed to carry the weight of geological ages. I spent the following days obsessed with the recording, listened repeatedly on my best headphones, analyzed the spectrograms, tried to compare it to any known natural or artificial sound. Nothing. It was completely unique. The more I listened, the more strange details I perceived. There were subharmonics that seemed to shift with each repetition of the loop. There were almost fractal patterns in the structure of the sound waves, and there was the feeling. Listening to that sound for too long left me feeling strange, slight nausea, a sense of disorientation, as if my own perception of space and time was being subtly warped. I tried recording again on subsequent nights in the same area at the same depth. Nothing. The sound didn't return. It was as if it had been a single transmission, or as if the source had moved away, or perhaps as if it knew it was being listened to. I returned to shore with my precious, disturbing recording, shared the sound with some frequencies filtered out as a precaution, an instinct I couldn't explain, with a few trusted bioacoustician colleagues. The reaction was unanimous, utter fascination, followed by a complete lack of explanation. No one could identify the source. Theories ranged from unknown geological phenomena to secret military equipment, or even vocalizations from a completely new, massive marine species. But no one could explain the mathematical complexity and the dissonant harmonics. I continued listening to the original unfiltered recording alone in my home studio. The obsession grew. The feeling of disorientation when listening became more pronounced. I started having strange dreams of vast underwater geometries pulsing in time with the deep tones, dreams where I was floating in a dark void, hearing the slow chant and sensing an immense unseen presence approaching, and the sound started to bleed into my reality. I began hearing it faintly at random moments, even without headphones, in the hum of my computer, in the distant traffic noise, in the silence of my apartment at night. It was like an auditory ghost, a frequency that had attuned itself to me, or me to it. My health began to decline. I lost my appetite. Sleep was rare and filled with nightmares. I pulled away from friends, family. My only companion was the sound. The need to understand it, to find its source, became the only thing that mattered. I sold some of my equipment to fund another expedition, longer this time, deeper, back to the Agulhas current. My colleagues tried to dissuade me, worried about my obsession and mental state. I ignored them. I had to go back. The sound was calling me. I returned to that remote area with the audio. This time, I came prepared to go deeper with a new hydrophone capable of reaching abyssal depths. I waited. The first few nights were silent. Frustration began to consume me. Had it just been a one-off event? An auditory hallucination? Then, on the fifth night, it returned. Stronger, more complex. The deep tones seemed to vibrate the very hull of the boat. The dissonant harmonics were almost painful. And this time, there was something else. Underneath the main tones, there was a very low rhythmic pattern, almost a click or pop, that hadn't been there in the first recording. I lowered the deep hydrophone as far as I could, over 3,000 meters. The signal became even clearer. The source was definitely down there, in the crushing, dark depths. And as I listened, mesmerized, I started seeing patterns on the sonar readings that made no sense. Vast, unnatural structures on the ocean floor, where there should only be mud and rock. Impossible geometries that seemed to correspond to the complexity of the sound. The sense of disorientation became overwhelming. The cabin floor seemed to tilt. The walls seemed to breathe. I no longer knew what was real and what was induced by the sound. But I couldn't stop listening. The sound promised something, knowledge, understanding, or just oblivion in its alien vastness. That's when my equipment began to fail. Lights flickering, monitors filling with static, alarms blaring randomly. And the sound changed again. The slow, deep tones were replaced by a cacophony of high, piercing frequencies, a sonic scream that felt designed to shatter the mind. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my own head. The last thing I remember clearly is seeing an immense, dark shape rising from the abyss on the sonar screen, moments before everything went black. I don't know how I survived. Days later, I was found adrift in the Audire by a fishing vessel, hundreds of miles from where I was supposed to be. I was dehydrated, malnourished, catatonic. My recording equipment was destroyed, the data wiped. Only a small, portable backup recorder I always carried in my pocket survived. I spent months recovering, physically and mentally. Doctors diagnosed extreme stress, isolation-induced psychosis. No one believed my story about the sound. I tried playing the recording from my backup for them. It contained only static and a low, rhythmic clicking. The main sound, the resonant tones, had vanished from the recording, as if they never existed, or as if they could only be heard by those who were attuned. Today, I live far from the sea. The ocean terrifies me, but the silence is almost worse, because in the silence sometimes I still hear it. Not the deep tones, but the clicks, the rhythmic pattern that appeared the second time. It's faint, almost imperceptible, but it's there. A constant reminder of what exists in the depths of the ghost frequency I heard. I don't know what the sound was, or what the thing was that rose from the abyss. But I know it broke me. Maybe the source of the sound was an entity, a vast, ancient intelligence communicating on a frequency the human mind cannot withstand. Or maybe it was just the sound of the abyss itself, the voice of pressure and eternal darkness, and I simply listened too closely, leaned too far over the edge of the unknown. Whatever it was, it left its echo inside me. The rhythmic clicks are the only proof I have, and they remind me that although I escaped the ocean, perhaps a part of the ocean never truly left me, and it's just waiting, clicking silently on the ghost frequency of my own mind. My name is Ricardo, and the ocean was my office, my playground, and my passion. I'm a marine biologist and technical diver, specializing in deep reef research. I spent months aboard research vessels, mapping fragile ecosystems and collecting samples at depths most people can barely imagine. The deep blue, the pressurized silence, the alien life flourishing in darkness, it all fascinated me. I felt more at home 100 meters down than on the surface, or at least I did before the incident in the Atacama Trench. We were aboard the RV Nereus, a state-of-the-art research vessel mapping an unexplored section of the Peru-Chile Trench, one of the deepest oceanic trenches in the world. Our goal was to use an ROV, remotely operated vehicle, to explore and collect samples from a newly discovered underwater ridge in that abyssal zone. I was part of the biology team, analyzing the ROV footage in real time and guiding the pilots. On points of scientific interest, the descent of the ROV, nicknamed Argus, was always a slow, tense process. Hours watching the water column gradually darken on screen, the pressure increasing relentlessly, the landscape becoming increasingly alien. We reached the target depth, around 6,000 meters. The landscape was desolate, a plain of fine, dark sediment, occasionally broken by bizarre rock outcrops and inhabited by pale, ghostly creatures, adapted to the crushing pressure and total darkness. We were piloting Argus along the base of the underwater ridge, when the ROV's powerful lights illuminated something unexpected. It wasn't rock, it wasn't sediment, it was metallic. Intrigued, we moved Argus closer. It was a roughly spherical object, perhaps 2 meters in diameter, partially buried in the sediment. Its surface was a dark, matte metal with no rivets, welds, or any sign of human manufacture. It was perfectly smooth, except for a series of fine, intricate grooves covering its surface in a non-geometric, almost organic pattern. There were no signs of corrosion, despite clearly having been there. For a very long time, at that crushing depth and corrosive environment, the excitement in the control room was palpable. What was it? A metallic meteorite, an unusually shaped manganese nodule, part of an unknown submarine, or something stranger. We decided to use Argus's manipulator arm to try and collect a small sample from the object's surface. When the robotic arm touched the sphere, something happened. Argus's lights flickered violently. All our monitors in the control room were momentarily filled with white static and a deafening high-pitched noise. It lasted only a second. Then everything returned to normal, except for one thing. A low-frequency signal, almost a pulse, began to be detected by our sensors. It was faint, but distinct and incredibly regular, and it seemed to be emanating directly from the metallic sphere. It wasn't a natural pattern. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat or a code. "What the hell was that?" asked Dr. Anya Sharma, the chief geologist, her eyes wide. "Don't know," replied Kenji, the lead ROV pilot. "Momentary overload when we touched the object, and this pulse, it wasn't there before." "Is it transmitting?" I asked, leaning over the audio console. "Is it some kind of signal?" "Doesn't match any known transmissions," the communications specialist said. "It's almost infrasonic and incredibly stable." We spent the next few hours studying the sphere from a distance, monitoring the strange pulse. We didn't try to touch it again. The pulse continued, unperturbed. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to seep into the very structure of the ship, into the air of the control room. I started getting a mild, throbbing headache, synchronized with the pulse. Others in the room also complained of nausea or dizziness. We decided to mark the sphere's exact location and bring Argus up. The ROV recovery was normal, but the atmosphere on the ship had changed. The initial excitement had given way to a quiet apprehension. That pulse, it felt wrong, deeply wrong. Even with the ROV back on board, some of us swore we could still feel the pulse, a phantom vibration in the back of our minds. My headache persisted, and that night I had the first nightmare. I was floating in the abyssal darkness, the pressure crushing my chest. Below me, the black sphere pulsed with a dark internal light. The sound of the pulse was deafening, shaking my body. And from the grooves on the sphere's surface, tendrils of shadow extended slowly towards me. I woke up in a cold sweat, the sound of the pulse still echoing in my ears. I wasn't the only one. The next morning at breakfast, several team members looked pale and tired, exchanging tense glances. Talk of strange nightmares, persistent headaches, and a general sense of unease was whispered. Anya mentioned dreaming of impossible geometric patterns that made her nauseous. Kenji spoke of a feeling of being pulled downwards into the darkness. All the dreams seemed linked somehow to the sphere and the pulse. The captain decided we should leave the area immediately and transmit our data, excluding the pulse and crew effects for now, back to base. But even as we sailed away from the sphere's location, the sense of unease on the ship didn't entirely disappear. The pulse might no longer be detectable by instruments, but it seemed to have left a mark. My headache became a constant companion, and the nightmares continued, growing more vivid. I saw the sphere opening, revealing not mechanics, but pulsating non-Euclidean geometry that hurt my eyes. or I heard voices whispering in time with the pulse, promising knowledge and power in exchange for something I couldn't understand. Started to feel different, more irritable, more isolated. I found myself sketching the sphere's intricate grooves in the margins of my notes without realizing it. I felt a strange, persistent urge to go back there, to touch the sphere again, to understand the signal. It was as if the pulse had planted a seed in my mind, a seed that was beginning to germinate in the darkness. When we finally reached port weeks later, I was physically and mentally exhausted. The official report mentioned the discovery of an anomalous metallic object of unknown origin, but deliberately omitted the pulse and the effects on the crew, classifying them as inconclusive instrument readings and mission-related stress. We were instructed to maintain absolute secrecy about the unofficial details. I returned to my life on land, but the ocean I had loved so much now felt menacing. The deep blue evoked not fascination, but a memory of the abyss and what it contained. The headache lessened, but never fully went away, and the nightmares, they changed. They were no longer about the sphere itself, but about the feeling of something approaching, rising from the depths, drawn by the signal I felt still resonated within me, however faintly. Sometimes, in the dead of night, especially near water, I swear I still hear it. Thump, thump, thump. The slow, steady pulse from the abyss. It reminds me of what we found down there, an artifact of alien intelligence, or perhaps something older and stranger, something that was dormant and that we, inadvertently, began to awaken by touching it. Don't know the purpose of the sphere or the signal. Was it a beacon, a trap, a form of communication, or the beating heart of something vast and asleep in the deep? I only know it marked me. I feel its subtle influence, a constant pull towards the darkness it came from. I fight it every day. Fascination has been replaced by fear, a deep fear, not just of the ocean, but of what might be answering that signal, rising slowly from the abyss, drawn by the echo of the pulse still vibrating in my soul. So what did you think of this chilling descent into these glimpses of the unknown horrors lurking in the ocean depths? Did these stories make you fear the deep sea? What kind of creatures or mysteries do you believe exist down there, far from the sun's light? If this narrative compilation left you feeling uneasy and perhaps a bit hesitant about your next swim, please show your support by hitting the like button. It truly helps bring more tales from the deep to the channel. Share your own scary maritime experience, a theory about unknown abyssal life, or just your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice helps chart the dark waters of fear. And most importantly, if you crave more dark and unsettling narratives, exploring the terror that emerges from the vast and mysterious ocean, subscribe to the Hear This Fear channel and turn on notifications. After all, you never know what might be swimming just beneath the surface, or much, much deeper.